We live in the most advanced technological era we could ever have. And every day, every week, it seems there's something that's getting better in our world when it comes to technology and our phones and our computers, how they're all getting bigger, better, faster, stronger. And yet there's one thing still that escapes us. And it doesn't look like to me there's any hope of it ever getting better. And that is that there seems to still never be enough space on my phone for all the photos and videos I'd like to take. I mean, what's the deal with that? Every month I'm paying Apple for some space in a random cloud somewhere up above. Like, just give me endless space. What's the deal? I mean, we can fit all sorts of data on a little square of computer, and yet you can't give me endless space for my photos? I mean, come on, man. I got vacations to post about. I've got meals that I want to share on Instagram with the world because the world needs to know that I ate at a cool place, right? Like, come on. But really, all these photos, like this space on my phone, that moment in your day, have you ever had this moment where you finally get some free time and you go through your phone and you delete all those old photos that are basically blocking you from all the other photos you want to take? Like, your inventory, your space is full. I mean, that is such a bother. I feel like it's almost as equal as going to the dentist as it is trying to delete old photos. It's the hardest thing for me to do, and yet I got to do it. I got to delete some of those old photos. You know why? Because I got to make room for the other things that I need space for on my phone. For example, have you ever had to delete something on your phone so you can make room for the new app you're about to download? Have you ever had to delete photos so you can take better photos? I mean, it's this tension, right? That often deleting something, subtracting something is how something else gets added. We get this when it comes to technology, but do we understand this when it comes to real life? I mean, sure, you might say, well, Garrett, yes, you're right. Sometimes we go on a diet. You know, we get rid of certain food from our diet so that we can cut weight and get into shape. Or we get rid of free time where we could be laying around and relaxing, and we go to the gym and we fill that with working out. You know, we get that. We give away something so we can get something back. That makes sense. But do we get this when it comes to life? See, I think the question of Jesus and of Jesus's followers who early on were practicing the way of Jesus. The earliest followers had these questions like, how do we become someone who lives like Jesus? How do we ever figure out what it means to grow in patience and to be less in anger? What does it mean to grow in gratitude and contentment and less in lust and greed? I mean, how are you and I ever going to become the kind of person Jesus says we can become? It is through certain disciplines. And there's one ancient Christian discipline that is mentioned in our culture, but usually only for the purpose of health. And today, we're going to enter into the history and look into this idea of what is fasting. Fasting is a biblical Jewish and Christian idea that essentially is when you voluntarily abstain from normal patterns, usually food. But you can abstain from anything. But it's when you voluntarily abstain from normal patterns to create space for the sake of spiritual activity. When people give up time and space in a different way so they can engage with God in new ways. This is an amazing idea. Fasting, typically with food, is when you give up the time it takes to find your food, prepare your food, make your food, and eat your food, and you give that up to go spend time with God. Now, a lot of people, they confuse fasting. They don't get it. They think that we fast because when we give up something for God, God notices more. He's like, oh, you gave up tacos today, so I'll answer your prayer a little faster. No, that's actually not what fasting is. And we don't fast because it's a more important thing. Like right now, I know of a lot of churches, including our own Christ Church of Flagstaff, that we have a day where we're fasting because of what's going on with the coronavirus. And that is an amazing thing. But we don't fast because we want to get God to do something. That's not what we're doing. We're creating more space for God to fill us, to feed us. And in fact, you know what another great definition for fasting is? Fasting is feasting on God. Fasting is feasting on the Spirit, on God. It is when you get rid of your normal patterns and make room for God to give you something else. When you and I fast, if we give up time on our phone, we give up our normal schedule, or we give up food and the time we normally use for food, and we replace it with like meditation, prayer, study, or worship. When we do that, we allow God to feed us. It's only by removing do we make room for the better. Only by removing those old photos do we get room for better and new photos. There's a really fun ancient story I want to read to you. John, the Gospel of John. This is the biographical account of the Apostle John in the life of Jesus. And he tells the story about when Jesus met this Samaritan woman by a well. And he has this long conversation with her that you got to read sometime. It's beautiful. But later on in John chapter 4, Jesus sent the woman away. She went to go talk to all of her friends and say, this guy Jesus is amazing. He told me everything that's ever been known about me. And then chapter 4, verse 31, here's what it says. Meanwhile, while Jesus' disciples had gone away and they went to go find food, they, meanwhile, urged Jesus to eat something. They're like, Rabbi, eat something. You've been out talking to this lady all day. Why don't you eat something? And then verse 32, he said to them, I have food to eat that you know nothing about. I love this because the disciples then say to each other, verse 33, could someone have brought him food? They're all like wondering if Jesus has a lar bar in his pocket. You know what I mean? They're like, is Jesus like sneaking bags of chips in his like satchel? What's going on? Like, what does he mean that he has food that we don't know of? And what Jesus is referring to is he's referring to this ancient practice of feasting on God. The idea is that what if you and I could be sustained by God in other ways than the natural ways of food? This is going to stretch some of us. As you and I begin to fast and use this as a spiritual discipline, something is happening to us as a person that does not make sense biologically or scientifically, but that is that God can supernaturally sustain us with what we need. This is how Jesus was able to fast for 40 days and 40 nights, which, by the way, don't just go for 40 days and 40 nights without food. You should try fasting in small ways before you do that. Jesus was a pro at it. He was a rabbi. He knew how to fast. He knew how to feast on God. God will supernaturally sustain us in life when we make room for him to do so. And so what Jesus says to his disciples in verse 34 is he says this, my food is to do the will of him who sent me and to finish his work. Jesus says, you want to know what my food is? To do the will of God. Have you ever felt that way about God and your faith? That it could sustain you when you needed extra strength? Have you ever felt like, I need something more than what I can give? I need more help. I need more creativity. I need more power. I need more love in me, and I don't have it in myself. Have you ever made room for God to give that to you? Fasting is feasting on God. Fasting is intentionally, voluntarily abstaining from a normal pattern of your life so that you can make room for spiritual activity. And so what we want to encourage you to do is to consider, what does it mean for you in your group, your Trinity group, to fast together? We want to give you this challenge of spending 6 hours one day choosing to give up food so that you can, in its place, practice one of the spiritual disciplines we've taught you and that you've been learning through the Trinity sessions. Because what happens to us when we fast is we don't just give it up because we're awesome and we're trying to prove how disciplined we are. No, 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 no. We are doing this so that we can feast on God and watch him provide for us. If there's a specific area of your life that you'd like to grow in, you wish you just had more patience, you wish you could forgive somebody, you've got these habits and things in your life that are just always there, maybe difficult people you're trying to learn how to love, let me encourage you to fast for them, to fast on their behalf, to give something up, to make space for that so God can feed you in that area. Jesus said that he has food for us that we know nothing about. I invite you to participate in the ancient spiritual practice, the ancient spiritual discipline of fasting, and watch yourself not just give something up, but watch God sustain you with his power. When you and I fast, we are choosing to feast upon God and his kingdom, his power, his love, available to us always.